Hey, what's up fellow makers? Welcome back to the garage. In today's video, I'm going to be finishing up the duct work for my dust collector. So let's jump into that. I'm Michael, and this is Maker at Play. Okay, so in our last video, you saw that I got the dust collector mounted on the wall over here. So now, the next step was to how do I get the suction power from here over to my power tools here. And I achieved that through PVC. So you'll see I've got PVC running up and across the ceiling and drops back down over here to provide me some duct ports on this side where I can hook up my table saw, my joiner. Eventually I'll get my planer hooked into it, as well as the router that I have mounted underneath my table saw. I chose to use 4-inch PVC for this because it's cheap and because I already had a lot of it. I previously had my dust collection all set up at my last garage in my previous house, which was more than 10 years ago. So to get this all set up, the goal was to reuse as much stuff as I already had. I started by getting all my boxes out of the attic that had all my dust collection parts from my previous setup, and I laid it all out on the garage floor so I could see what all I had to work with. So that kind of set the scope and the constraints of what I had to work with. I started by building the main pipe that is coming off of the dust collector and goes up vertically to the ceiling. That pipe is then going to branch at the top because I do want it to come across to my drill press and my CNC machine that I have along the wall with the dust collector. Then I also wanted to run across the ceiling and do a drop over by all my power tools, which are really clustered around my table saw, which is my joiner, my planer, my table saw, router table. I also have a connection off there so I can plug in my bandsaw whenever I use it, but it won't be permanently hooked to dust collection. I also wanted to, at the bottom of that drop, I built a little dust shoe so that I could easily sweep up the garage and have it just sucked up in there. And I'll create another video that shows how I actually built the dust shoe at the bottom of that dust collection drop. For this to be most efficient, the goal was to try to avoid any sort of 90 degrees within the PVC. So you'll notice on any of my 90-degree transitions, I actually use 245s to kind of ease that transition just to make it a little bit more efficient. So I used drain waste pipe, which is thinner. It's not as thick as the Schedule 40 PVC that you normally use for pressured water delivery. If you can use 5-inch or 6-inch, that'd be much better because you have a larger volume of air and it'd be more efficient. But again, I'm working within the constraints that I have. I have 4-inch pipe, I have 4-inch fittings. So I have a 4-inch dust collection system. I think it's going to be good enough for me. I will have to put a little bit more effort into the table saw. So even though I've got dust collection going to it, that contractor saw that I have is really not designed very well for dust collection. It has a dust collection port on it, but again, it's not very efficient. I need to close in the underneath of the table saw better to create better suction around the saw blade. So that's a project I'll work on at a later time. All the PVC is just dry fitted. So I'm either using white duct tape to tape the fittings together to create a better seal, but also so that I can take it apart later if I want to reconfigure the system. And I also, in other places, I'm using self-tapping screws just to drill through and screw the fittings together. Again, to give me the ability that if I need to or want to reconfigure it, I can still take it back apart and reuse these pieces. I definitely do not want to glue anything because I don't want it to be permanently fixed and then I have to cut it loose later and I can't reuse those parts. Using the self-tapping screws holds really well. It provides a much stronger mechanical connection than actually using the tape. The screws do protrude into the tubing, which may create a little bit of resistance for the airflow, but for me it doesn't really make that big of a difference. I'd much rather have the stronger physical connection of the screws as opposed to worried about what sort of interference it creates or how a little less efficient or what efficiencies it steals away from the system. On the main drop by the power tools, I wanted to provide as many connection ports as I could for my different tools that I rolled around as well as the stationary tools that are here. So my first thought is I started stacking up the Wise connectors to see how many I could get, but it didn't really work out that well and that I didn't want the dust ports to be that high. So it actually worked out better that I ended up with just having 3 of the Wise, and then I did coming off the side, I could have additional connections, one for the table saw and then that other end connection is what will go on to my planer once I end up creating the stand for my planer that will sit on the far side of my jointer. Here's where on the main branch it splits off to come across here, and there'll be a drop that comes down for the drill press as the CNC. I need to buy me another piece of sewer pipe so that I can finish up that connection, but that's where my drop for the drill press and CNC will come off of. On the main drop that drops down to the table saw and joiner, I also left myself a connection up here so that I can extend the system. My idea here is I will come off with a swinging cantilever that will have probably a 2-inch or 3-inch hose that drops down off of, which then I can use for my hand tools like my orbital sander. So when I'm sanding, I can hook it up to dust collection. And that's my dust collection system.